Greetings and welcome to the youth political podcast that is PolitiBabble, where this week it is all about our voting systems.
I'm Oliver, and as usual, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host Archibald. Hello.
Well, yes, we don't actually have a guest this week for once, which means Oliver and I can get right down to cracking on with the business.
Absolutely.
So, what do we get up to this week?
Well, I've, for the past few days, been rehearsing most of the days for a show that I'm in at the Gaiety Theatre in a few weeks' time called A Chorus Line, so that's very interesting, exciting. Yes, it'll be my first time playing an adult principal role, so yes.
Oh, very exciting. Well done. Hope it goes well.
Yeah, so in a few weeks' time, the 7th to the 14th of August, get on down, book your tickets at villagaiety.com, and come watch Chorus Line, 7th to the 14th of August. Got to give it a little plug here.
What's it about? What's it about?
Chorus Line is about, it's about an audition process, but it has the people that get obviously there's it's an audition process to get into a show, a chorus line. So it's basically they have a mass audition, and then 17 people get through to the next stage of the audition.
So really what they're doing is a live performance of an audition.
Yes, and or it goes into the backgrounds and lives and past experiences of the performers. And it's quite poignant at this time because it talks about how hard it's been for some of the performers. And it's very relevant at the moment with how many performers and actors and dancers have had a very challenging past 18 months.
Indeed. So are you sure it's not actually just that you're practicing for the audition and then you actually go up and that is actually the real audition? Oliver is out there on the stage.
Yeah. No, that's how it is. It is. It's a really good show. So definitely
have they decided already who goes through?
Yes.
Unfair.
Yeah, I'm not going to say who gets through, whether I do or not. You'll have to come watch the show.
Indeed. Leave it on a cliffhanger there.
Absolutely.
But due to the weather being so lovely,
yes,
it's no longer a Quake question this week, but rather a question of what, Oliver?
What ice cream would you consume at this moment in time?
Ooh, well, consume is a very, very good word. So I'm not sure whether I consume it more, lick it, or watch it melt in my hand in this way. They'll instantly turn into a puddle.
Yeah.
But I must say, luckily we're not in the south of England at the moment where there's 33 degrees.
I mean, for the Isle of Man, I think we've broken records this week. It has been absolutely delightful. I mean, looking out the studio window at the moment, there is actually, I was going to say there's not a cloud in sight, but there is actually one cloud in sight.
Oliver, it's audio.
Yes,
they didn't know. They didn't know.
But the bay is like a pond. It's amazing. But have you been up to much this week before we get on to the ice cream question?
Not particularly, no. Finishing the last week of school so far, and then I'm off to enjoy the lovely sweltering heat, I must say.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, so if I was going to be an ice cream, I don't know. Oh, I'd probably...
Ice cream would you consume, Oliver?
I do like a Magnum. Yes. I do like a Magnum. I do like a Solero, so I'd have to, if for a specific flavour, I'd go for salted caramel.
There we are.
Yeah, you can't beat a bit of salted caramel ice cream, especially Davison's. Ooh, lovely.
Max plug there, of course. Well, I must say, for me, it's very, very close between a brilliant, I think, Ferrero Rocher ice cream I had when I was away a couple of summers ago. I love Ferrero Rocher, brilliant chocolate. Or I think I'd go for hazelnut overall. I do have a good hazelnut ice cream, very tasty.
I don't think I've ever had it.
Oh, I do recommend hazelnut's brilliant nut, up there with macadamia nuts for me. Another acquired nut, which is quite odd, but there we go. Oh, so going away from ice cream, we're voting on ice cream.
Yeah, we
in
can
a
go
way
back to
we're voting. So we're going back to what really process are we using? Obviously, for ice cream, we're not actually voting, but here on the Isle of Man, we use a very interesting form of democracy. So we usually would have, I think, generally the most common forms of electoral processes are first past the post, where the person who gets the most votes in a certain area gets in for that seat. Or we have proportional representation, where the party gets the share of the vote, and the share of the vote then gets a share of the seats in the main parliament. So here on the Isle of Man, we have what I'd like to describe. If you do political science and study the Isle of Man extensively, please do feel free to correct. But it's almost like a double double past the post system, really, because the top two people with the most votes in each constituency, we have 12 constituencies, they all have 2 seats.
They
top
didn't
two-
used to.
They
though.
didn't used to.
And
But
it's
we
more.
shan't confuse people.
Yeah, it's more. It's fairer now than it
Yeah.
was, isn't it? Yeah.
So the top two people who top the polls in each constituency get seats. So
Mhm.
if two members of our parliament, so MHKs, members of the House of Keys, which is our lower house, two MHKs for each constituency, which is quite interesting. It's quite odd. It's quite odd.
It is, yeah. But I think it does work quite well.
It makes it more fair in a way, because if you look at the UK, you could have maybe, let's say, it's usually Labour and Conservatives kind of vying for that top
Yeah.
place in most of the seats, bar a few obviously. So you'd then have like a big share of Conservative vote, and they'd be like missed out, very slim majority of like 1% or something. And you'd have Labour underneath, and they don't get represented. So if you had two for each constituency, you'd have double number of MPs. It would be ridiculous. But if you had two for each constituency, then you get both sides. You get more of the build
Equal
more of the
share.
electorate have a representative
Yeah.
who they voted for. But obviously we're talking, and it's kind of, if you looked at the UK and implemented the Isle of Man systems in the UK, you'd have like ridiculous, like 18,000 MPs or something.
Wow.
Stupid, ridiculous amounts. But more representation at the local
Yeah.
level, I assume.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, on the Isle of Man as well, obviously we have the upper house, which is obviously elected by the MHKs. So that's not to everyone's agreement. And then within the upper house, we have our Attorney General sits in there, and our Bishop as well. Obviously, they are not. They're already in there no matter what. But that's not most favourable by some people.
Oh, we see the UK, which is a kind of comparable. It's a Westminster style of democracy, where the upper house is all unelected. They're all well. I suppose here we could argue our members of the Legislative Council, which is our upper house, aren't really elected by the people. They're elected by the elected.
Yes, and if they're if they're your friend or whatever, or
Oh, we don't crony politics or the. Oh, what are you talking about? No.
And obviously the chief minister as well that's another thing that many people in the Isle of Man want to do. They want to, wherever you propose that if you want to be a chief minister, then you have to give advance notice, and then you'd get put on. You'd also do when you go to the poll, you'd have a vote for each chief minister that wanted to be put forward, and then you could vote for one of them. But it makes it
far too complicated, because obviously if chief minister,
because you'd be voting all Ireland then, and then people might say, well, why don't you just have all Ireland MHKs? And
Guernsey introduced that. That's more, I suppose, more proportional. But it's like 24 members past the post or something. However, members of the lower house, they all get voted island wide now. I think it's Guernsey or Jersey. They do confuse me, the two of them. They're very much alike.
They're very close as well.
Very close as well, and very, very warm weather at the moment. It's ridiculously hot. But their system's more island. They introduced island-wide ballots in the last one, so you stood as an island, and you voted for your top 24, which makes it more confusing, because
top 24.
There were however many in the parliament.
Right.
You vote for all of them, so you rank them. It's quite odd, and here
that must become very complicated.
It becomes a lot of work, because you have to read more manifestos, you have to vote for more people, you have to rank them. It's very odd, I'd say.
So there is just one constituency then.
I'm pretty sure. I think it's.
I suppose it makes sort of less admin work in some ways, but then more in others.
It'd be very funny if I was totally wrong on this. It's not actually Guernsey. So do your own research. So yes, it is Guernsey. So the electoral system was changed in 2018 by a referendum. We love referendums, don't we?
Absolutely.
There were 38 members of the state, which is their lower house or parliament, will be elected from a single island-wide constituency by plurality at large voting, with voters able to cast 38 votes.
Right.
Yeah. Which is quite. I must say that's quite a lot of votes to vote for. But that's obviously a different system. It's plurality at large. It's very, very large, but it's still a form of first past the post system. But let's say we obviously we haven't talked about the other system, which is obviously proportional representation, where the number of votes your party gets as the number of seats you get. And I think a good example of that, I suppose, in Canada's, I think was it Canada's? Oh no, I'm getting confused because lots of countries there's been lots of analysis done to kind of show the different map. And it's quite interesting if you looked at the UK, where obviously the Conservative Party wouldn't really be in power without a coalition, because proportional representation, they form a lot of coalitions, because parties are very unlikely to achieve above 50% majority in Parliament. That is quite rare to do. So it's a very odd system. What do you think about proportional voting?
I suppose it's for party politics. Obviously, it sort of does work, doesn't it? But no, I'm not the biggest fan. I think the first past the post is probably the best way to do it. But then you have obviously in I only found this out recently. You have police and crime commissioners as well. I didn't, because obviously on the Isle of Man,
Oh yeah,
you just make your way up the constabulary, and that's how you become, the leader of it. Whereas in the UK, it's done sort of politically.
yeah. Well, they have a degree of oversight. It's not necessarily a total. They don't become a police officer, so they can't go arrest random people because they're voted in politically. That would be rather interesting if they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's most of them. Okay, proportional representation. There are different varieties. So some countries use. I think it's some countries use proportional representation and kind of first past the post. They have party votes on the regional level. I think Scotland is an example of this here. The regional level of votes with percentages, and that's how you get more seats. And then you have the constituency votes, where you vote in constitution. That's still first past the post. So that combines a mixture of both. And then we see proportional representation, which is more of a party list. It's done by parties. So we see countries like Spain, like Sweden, like Switzerland, where they'll have a vote in your party. You put your vote for the party, and then nationally that all gets collated and put in. So we would see kind of in the UK Parliament, for example, you'd see a lot more Green Party seats, I suppose, in the last election, if you did have proportional representation, because there are lots of different support, but it's scattered across the country. And obviously Brighton, there's one MP, but it's very, very far scattered there.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, isn't it? All the different ways of doing things, but I suppose that's what makes the world have a good democracy, isn't it? By the different ways. And I suppose the Isle of Man kind of wants to change how things are done, don't they?
In what ways?
Well, with the Chief Minister, don't they? They want it to become sort of you have to announce prior to because obviously in the Isle of Man you don't find out who the Chief Minister is until October, and then the Chief Minister then gets to decide who he wants or she wants in their cabinet.
But arguably, I'd say
they'd put if they weren't to do that, they put in advance notice. Yes, I want to be put forward for Chief Minister, and then you go on voting day and you vote in your constituency for two candidates, and then you've got another piece of paper which has a list of all the. Now, what would you do? Would you vote for just one? What would you do? Would you vote for just one candidate for Chief Minister, or would you rank them?
Well, I would personally say I don't think it's the majority that I would want to introduce that. We're very I think it's almost like 10 years behind, which is it's just nice in a way, because we can see.
But would you?
I don't think the majority I would want that at all, and it's a very, very messy system.
Yeah.
Because if you had a voting for Chief Minister on the same ballot, it'd be better if you wanted to do something like voting for Chief Minister. You'd either want to introduce a party system where you would know what the leader is voting on the party, or you'd want to have a Chief Minister vote separate to the election.
Yeah.
But then that introduces voter apathy. But if you had the problem is, if you had an elected Chief Minister, if you go away from the logistics of how you would do it, is if you have an elected Chief Minister, the Chief Minister is kind of the government, and the Chief Minister will still select his cabinet. So the Chief Minister still has, or selects her cabinet, or select their cabinet, for example. That the Chief Minister still has that control, and the government proposes the legislation, which goes through into Parliament, with the exception of obviously a few private member bills. But then it appears that the Chief Minister's proposed legislation the other 23 members or 18 members out of Coman decide they don't like the chief ministers. They don't like the government's proposals. And it becomes in deadlock. It's very important to have a chief minister who has the support of Tynwald.
Yes,
but if you went into having that party vote, it does look a bit bolshy and a bit egotistic to say, "Oh yes, I'm standing. Oh yes, I want to be chief minister. I'll put it on."
And then you don't get in. That's the other thing. And
it's a bit like, that person wanted to become our leader, but he's had no experience yet.
Yeah.
And
even if they did have experience and they didn't get in,
it'd be a bit.
But so you're not for that.
No. I'm not for an elected chief minister. It's just like in the UK.
So you don't want to. But do you personally want a say in who your chief minister is?
I think it should be left to the parliament. If we had a party system, well, obviously then I'd have a say depending on if I voted in the party or you voted as for the party. Then you have a say. But I don't think it should be. I should have a say if it's elected independently, purely because they will create parliamentary deadlock, which would be awful in all cases.
Yes. Obviously, you've talked about it before, but I thought I'd just bring it up because we've been talking about parties and stuff. But currently in the Isle of Man, there is parties present, but there's not really party politics at the moment. Do you think there could be a chance that there'll be more parties within Tynwald in September?
People have been pushing it for a while, but there's been parties around. I think the next Labour Party has been celebrating 121 years. It's never become a party system.
And it's never really even had. Several
we're
seats.
Not built. I wouldn't say we're built for a party system because we have
things would change though, wouldn't they?
There's so many variety of views. So to encompass that in a party, you need many parties, and our parliament doesn't really lend itself well to having parties because then we would elect a Legco. Well, if you had a big party of, let's say, you have the two sides, well, obviously then when the Legco seats, the 4 come up for election, they'd replace them with 4 Labour Party or 4 Green Party.
Yeah.
For example, that's probably what would happen if you look at the UK. And then, well, let's say they stay in power, and you've got the Legco election comes around again, and the government's back in, then you have 8 all in the same party in Legco. It doesn't necessarily lend itself well, but having independence, they can kind of model and kind of shift alliances within it, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
But if you looked at the UK, if they introduced, go back to proportional representation, it's quite interesting the analysis done because under first past the post, the Conservatives have and currently have 365 seats in Parliament. Actually, they might have more or less. That's 2019 statistics.
Yeah, they've gone up.
Actually, has it changed? Because they've had the by-election where they gained a seat, and the by-election where they lost a seat. So it's neutral,
where the Lib Dems got in.
But under proportional representation, they lose 77 seats, and they wouldn't have an outright majority. They wouldn't have an outright majority. They would be under majority. The Brexit Party, on the other hand, would have 10 seats, and they currently have none in Parliament, or the Reform Party rather. Labour, I think. Would Labour have gone up? I think Labour would have again gone up 14, so not many. They did an awful performance anyway in 2019. It was very, very happy to see that. But then we have Liberal Democrats. They would have massively increased
Archie.
by about 59.
Sorry, Archie, what happened to us being non-partisan?
I thought we were partisan. We can have the variety to challenge views there, Oliver. And then the Green Party would have increased their share by would have had 11 more.
Yeah,
11
it would have
more
gone
seats.
up. Yeah.
And SNP would have massively reduced their power within the Westminster system. It's quite fascinating the differences if we had it. What would you say? Would you think we should keep first past the post? Should we do a mix of first past the post and proportional, where you have the regional lists and the party lists, and they get seats anyway? Or do you think we should go full on proportion? Obviously, there's many other voting systems. Do very basic.
No, I think first past the post. I think it's in my way, it's the fairest way of doing it, and it's I think that's the best way.
Well, there's obviously we could suggest other suggestions.
Other ways of voting. We could go on to look at loads of different countries and places and
there's so many different systems which are obviously once you create a theory, I could create a system myself. I could say only those over £1 million in net worth can be able to vote, and only those over £1 billion can actually have any power, and we elect one leader to do everything. That's a voting system.
Only people over the age of 50 can stand, and
the voting systems can become very, very interesting. But you obviously have the knockout rounds. So we see the French presidential race is usually, I'd suppose, more knockout, where you kind of whittle it down. So you say, well, let's say you have 10 people. This is just knockouts. Well, you then the 100 people, they all vote. For the last 2 get knocked out. They have this in the Conservative Party leadership elections usually.
So
well, then
and that's where the party votes.
and then no, this is just in if you had a knockout system. And then
How
the
does
next
that work?
So let's say you had 5 candidates.
Yeah.
You do the first round of voting. Let's say the last candidate then gets knocked out. The last 2 get knocked out because they're the least votes. Then those 2 people who voted for those 2 then have the chance in the next round to vote for any one of the next 3. And you can whittle it down to get 2. So though basically everyone has more of a democratic voice. Because let's say I voted for a candidate who gets 1 vote. I'm the only person who gets voted. Then my vote there doesn't matter. But with knockout voting, you have the opportunity to vote again. So you almost you have different rounds of voting, really, which is quite interesting. But is not very lending itself towards mass voter participation. Because I'm sure, Oliver, if I asked you to go out to the polls 10 times for a proper knockoff round, you might get voter apathy.
Yes.
Well, would you continue to vote? You'd probably continue to vote.
I would because I'm interested.
Yeah.
But if you weren't,
lots of people would just say,
yeah.
And
this is why the Isle of Man only comes around once every 5 years.
Yes.
So hopefully you're all eager for Thursday, the 23rd of September 2021, where the Isle of Man heads to the polls for the general election.
I know I am, Oliver. Yes. I know I am. I know you are.
Do you think? I don't think there'll be much voter apathy for that, will there? I think people will be eager.
It'd be interesting it'd be really interesting if the turnout rates went really far up. That'd be really good.
I think they will. I think they will.
But if they follow the same methods of a certain sort on Twitter, where they won't register to vote because the government might then, because they have to put their information into the electoral register, or alternatively, think that MHK. There's another system where you have recall mechanisms. I suppose recall mechanisms work under set circumstances. So if they committed a criminal offence, recall them, absolutely. If they committed suspended from Parliament for so long for disorderly conduct, recall mechanism. But you can't add a recall mechanism for absolutely any reason at all if you get 10% of electors, because quite simply, if 10% of electors really dislike the candidate, 90% like them, the 10% can keep recording election after election after election, purely just because they can. And then that's an interesting point of our electoral process. Should we have recall mechanisms, Oliver? Throwing questions out and for more questions to come.
I don't think so, no.
No. Oh, interesting. Anyway, this week, I suppose, we had a very, very interesting choice for our historical figure because they're still alive.
Yes, they weren't that long ago, not in power. They were the 44th President of the United States of America.
Any guesses who it is? I don't know. Tell us.
It is Barack Hussein Obama. Yes, he was President of the United States from January the 20th, 2009 to January the 20th, 2017. So he served 2 terms. A member of the Democratic Party. He was the first African American to be elected for presidency, and previously served as the United States Senator. So, very interesting man indeed. And obviously his vice president was Joe Biden. And Joe Biden has obviously now gone on to become President of the United States.
But can he remember that, Oliver? There's always a question.
I knew there was going to be a comment there. Yes.
Can he remember if he's vice president or not? But interesting, Obama. He's had an interesting legacy. He did cause a few wars in a way. He did cause a few conflicts.
He's very Donald Trump was very critical of him, wasn't he? He made a lot of criticism and stuff about him. But definitely a very interesting president. And he did 2 terms, unlike Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, I think, was very certain that he was going to do 2 terms, and he I know we're going a bit away from Barack Obama here, but he blamed a lot of it's American politics, but he blamed a lot about the postal system, which is something else that's to do with voting. He called it sort of scandalous, didn't he?
Well, I suppose he also did kind of revoke quite a lot of Obama administration era legislation. So we saw Obamacare, we tried to dismantle. I think he failed in the end, which was interesting. But although Trump didn't actually start any new wars after Obama, which is quite interesting because we've seen a lot of. It does seem Americans do like to meddle in foreign affairs. So it's very interesting the contrast between the two because one basically. It swings and roundabouts American politics. Like Obama introduced all these things, signed the Paris Accord. Trump comes into power, gets rid of them. Biden comes back, brings them back in. It goes in roundabouts. It's like a turntable, really.
It is, yeah. But I suppose it makes it exciting, doesn't it? And I suppose that's why people.
Frustrating.
It's probably why people probably will go back to Trump, won't they, in 2024?
Well, we don't know.
Is it 2024?
Yeah. Oh, crikey, yeah. It's not
I mean,
long
I'm
away.
pretty sure he does want to. He'll stand again.
He'll probably want to stand, yes. Well, moving on from our historical pick of the week, what's the news looking like, Oliver?
Well, it's certainly been a very interesting week for us all on the Isle of Man with our weekly roundup of the headlines. So, there is currently, I think, 893 active cases of coronavirus on the Isle of Man. Lawrence Skelly is now the new president of Tynwald. Pharmacies run out of lateral flow tests. Mark Cavendish wins the green jersey at the Tour de France, but misses out on the stage win record. And there's a plea from businesses for self-isolation. As well as this, I've gone beyond the theme tune now.
Keep going.
But there's been lots to cover. So and also the DOI, the Department of Infrastructure, is under fire for not doing enough to help with local elections. So we'll go back up to the top. I think there's 893.
Skim back up.
I think there's 893 cases.
Yes.
There's obviously been sort of.
There's 101 last week.
Yes,
I think that says a lot.
Yeah, this time last week when we were recording, I think there's 101. I think it's probably gone up. I'll have to check now whether there's still 893 cases.
You go up in about 12. Sorry, we can give you an update at the end of the program.
Yeah.
12 minutes. When the daily case.
Here we go. No, we've got it now.
They're out.
They're out. They usually come out at 3:30 now, but it does say 3 in hospital as COVID cases top 1,000. So there's been 103 cases in the last 24 hours. Yes, but. Good news is at the moment nobody is in intensive care, and obviously if you are in hospital, we pass on our best wishes and regards, and we hope anyone that's currently isolating with coronavirus that they make a full, speedy recovery. So now, Lawrence Skelly is the new president of Tynwald this morning.
Congratulations!
Yes, congratulations,
indeed.
Mr. Skelly. There was 2 people contesting for
Mr. Skelly and
presidency.
Mr. Watterson.
Mr. Watterson.
Yes.
So congratulations to Lawrence Skelly. He will serve the post until 2026, and I imagine he can carry on from then.
I suppose. I don't.
It clearly goes up for re-election. Pharmacies run out of lateral flow tests. So later on last week, the Isle of Man government made a new policy, which was if you're a close contact of someone that's tested positive with COVID-19, you'd no longer have to self-isolate, and you could partake in a 7-day home. I don't know why it's 7 days, because the actual isolation period on the Isle of Man currently, if you've got COVID-19, is 10. But it's a 7-day home testing thing which you could partake in with lateral flow testing. Currently, they're in very much of high demand.
But interestingly, I was quite shocked at this. If you test positive on a lateral flow, which I suppose the NHS said was around 99.9% correct in most cases.
Well, I've seen that they're not that much.
They're most positive wise. I said positive wise.
Yeah. Oh, right.
They're very light. They're very light. If you get positive
if
result,
you've got high levels of coronavirus, then yes. But if it could, like for some people, it could be in your system.
If you're negative, you're more likely to be a false negative than if you're positive, you are to be a false positive.
Yeah, definitely.
But you're not mandated to isolate if you test positive for lateral flow.
It's only on a PCR
test.
So
I could go out, I could go to shops, I could go to. Obviously, this wouldn't be responsible, but the point is you're not mandated to do so, nor are you mandated, I think, to book a PCR test.
No.
So
because you could dispose of that, you could destroy it immediately.
Exactly.
The only reason that you're legally required to self-isolate is under a PCR test.
Because you get a direction notice, which legally requires. So it's quite interesting. But obviously, lateral flow tests, they've run out of stock now.
Yes.
It's just as you said,
because they do come in, and then people go for them. But I think now they only really want you to get one if you've been sent an email by 111. that you're a close contact, because they just don't want anybody and
But
everybody getting
it's
them.
it's important.
But I think it's safe that
Yeah.
everyone gets them. If
But-
you feel uncomfortable about it all, then I think you should have access to them.
Well, a couple of days ago, I went down to one of the school car parks where the Civil Defence was distributing them. I was 8:20, which is 20 minutes since they started. I was running a tiny bit late, 20 minutes. All gone.
Yeah.
And I thought, and they said, oh, we are apparently going to get some more stock in later this evening. We don't know when. So it was a bit like, it's pot luck as if you get them or not. So yeah, it is quite. It's quite a lot of cases.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of cases.
But we're vaccinated, so what do you think?
We're
Oliver?
not.
Well, we're not, obviously, but I mean, general.
yes,
do you
most
think we
of
should
the-
open up?
I think we need to add more mitigations in place. For example, such as face masks in buildings that are not very well ventilated. Obviously, that can be an option, but I think it should be pretty much mandatory.
Well, the UK has gone to Freedom Day as well, which yesterday.
And
yeah.
I mean, we've got more cases now than the UK in some ways. But
more it's good to mention here. We have more cases, I think, if you want per head, maybe.
Per head, yeah.
It certainly won't be more. Yes, the UK is under 1,000 cases for 66 million. That would be pretty astonishing.
Yeah,
if it were.
and I think we should stop not having massive large gatherings,
But
because I
if
do
we
feel like
did-
they are super spread.
My main point is, if you currently we're forced to PCR test if we arrive on island, but those vaccinated aren't. But I think this is keeping the policy consistent. If you require the unvaccinated PCR test, why not test the vaccinated? Because the vaccinated have been proven they can still spread it around. That's how it got onto the island. So that is quite interesting, I must say. Yeah, I must say it's good. Moving on, it's very good news for Mark Cavendish. Well,
Yes,
not very
yeah.
good. Good news, regardless.
Yeah, no,
of winning
very good news. I
another
think
green
he is
jersey.
probably the best best sportsman the Isle of Man has ever had. Undoubtedly. Hopefully he'll be back next year to get the all-time record for stage wins, which will be absolutely phenomenal. And
Indeed,
he'll probably
indeed.
be known as the greatest cyclist or the greatest sprinter of all time. I think he's done exceptionally well for himself. He's just shown that anything is possible, because he's not a spring chicken anymore. He got his first stage win. I'm not sure when it was, but quite a long time ago. Anywho, I think it's now time to move on.
No.
You want to cover something else?
The DOI.
Yes.
We've seen the local elections coming up this Thursday, which we might be out, but then I've already been. So we're out on Thursday the 22nd. The local elections. Those now self-isolating can't vote, nor can they register for an absentee ballot.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like, well, you're gonna have to. You should have now, in hindsight, you should have applied and you should have guessed that you're going to catch coronavirus before you knew you're going to catch coronavirus. It's quite shocking the way it's gone.
Yeah, it is. It's a pain, and it will spoil some people that are part of that. How many people isolating will be really disappointed? Will have wanted to vote.
Well, some candidates.
And
will be more disappointed.
And it will affect. It is someone's democratic right to vote. I think they should have had plans in place, thinking about this is the problem with the government at the moment. It's either we go full out and do something like locking down, or we just scrap everything. And it's the same with these elections. It's the planning that they should have put forward. Worst case scenario, because it's either that, like they did do with the elections, we're either going to postpone them, or we're going to have them, and there is no we're going to put these sort of mitigations in place to help them carry on. But yeah,
indeed. Well, turning to the UK news, Dominic Cummings sat down for his first interview, which is quite interesting. The record heatwave happened in the UK with the Met Office's first extreme weather warning. And there's a record 430 migrants in one day crossing the channel.
Wow.
And also the Pegasus project findings have been revealed. And obviously the last one there was quite shocking. It was spyware developed by an Israeli tech firm, which is used by many governments across the world to compromise journalists and other dissident phones who they didn't like. And once the phone was successfully infected, not many were, I think, in the end, but once it's successfully infected, the software can then turn on the microphone. It can listen to conversations. It can record all calls. It extracts all the data immediately from the phone. So you basically have that person's phone.
I mean,
It's quite shocking.
people have been saying that, like, for example, if you talk a lot about, I've probably had this, if I talk about, running shoes, I really want a new pair of running shoes, and you talk about that a lot, or other things, it comes up on your suggestions.
That's however, against popular belief, it's not actually due to them listening to you. It's from the fact that in the algorithm, you're then thinking about new running shoes. So what you're doing, kind of, the algorithm's extraordinarily clever, and it can almost guess. Well, you're looking at these sorts of things. You're typing. You can look at your patterns and your search history. And that's almost what your mind does at the same time. So it's almost mimicking the mind to thinking, oh, you want a new pair of running shoes. Well, you've been doing this research about this. You've been going on runs, for example. And if I recognise it, it's quite fascinating.
Well,
it's an algorithm.
It still is.
Scary. It's scary.
It is scary, though. Yeah, no, definitely. Touching on Dominic Cummings,
yes.
I think his interview, obviously, I don't know, hopefully, if
Laura
you're watching,
yes.
I don't if you're listening to this via one of our podcast platforms, I think it should be available to watch now. But if you're watching this on
no, it should be. The clips are available already on BBC.
There's a preview, but the actual program airs tonight on BBC Two, I think, at 7 p.m.
Yes.
So when I get home this evening, I'll definitely be catching on to that. I think it'll be great to hear. There was a preview, and it did seem interesting. It said, so you were under fire. Is this you backfiring? You know.
Oh, very snappy.
Yeah, no, it looked like a very good interview.
Hopefully, it goes better than the Prince Andrew interview, I must say. Yes.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure Dominic Cummings will be sweating. Yes.
Absolutely. You don't sweat.
Did he go to that Pizza Express in Woking, Dominic Cummings? Who knows? His alibi is more by the castle, I think. So yes. And obviously, I think this is a record 430 migrants in one day across the channel. It's quite something. Obviously, they were claiming asylum, but I think Priti Patel makes a good point. They can, if we look at migration, they can be claiming asylum, maybe the countries which they first land on, and that's how it can be processed. Because obviously, the UK is having a big crackdown at the moment on any form of illegal migration. With the new bills being introduced, which is quite interesting.
I mean, the width of the channel is at one point. How far do you know?
Do you know all that?
That's what I'm trying to research now. How wide is the English Channel? About 21 miles wide. That's quite far.
Wide.
That is quite wide. Yeah.
Yes, that is very, very wide, I must say.
It's a long way, especially out at sea. Definitely. Yes.
Well, I must say, it's obviously this week we didn't actually get a guest on, so first I suppose we'll move on to our recommendations. Obviously, what's are your recommendations for this week, Oliver? Took me a while to get that jingle up.
Well, reading wise, obviously after his very successful week and tour. I have, if you can see via the Manx Radio Vision camera, I'm going to start. I think my father has read this book, so I thought, I better read it. It's probably written quite a while ago, but it'll still be interesting to look at an earlier point in his career. But it's Boy Racer by Mark Cavendish. It's an autobiography, my journey to Tour de France record breaker, and he's certainly, I don't know when this was written, but he's a record breaker now. And obviously, watching wise, it's the Tour de France because. I was watching Cav sprinting to, I think it was second or third. He could have got his stage win record. He could have got the outright record on Sunday, but he didn't manage to on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. It was very exciting, but he got sort of blocked in. Anyway, but I've been watching bits and bobs of the Tour de France, and listening wise today, I was listening to the Tynwald sitting, a bit of Manx politics. It's very interesting. I caught on to a bit at the start and just listening to a bit again here in our wonderful studio, since the listening is published and recorded and aired live by Manx Radio. So yes, obviously listen to the new president get elected in. Archie, what are your recommendations for this week to our listeners?
Well, my recommendations for a reading is quite a light, quite easy read introduction to philosophy, which is the philosophy files. They're quite entertaining to read. They're not too heavy, but that has definitely led me into heavier philosophy books. I think that it's not the heaviest of the philosophy books I have. I have one which is On What Matters, when I bought when I was about 13, very confident which I bought it, and I couldn't understand a word of it. So I am
Really?
I am attempting it again, and it does prove quite interesting. But Philosophy File is a good one to ease into any form of philosophy.
Yeah.
Watching wise, I remember brilliant. I must have saw a clip on YouTube the other day. The Death of Stalin. I think it's actually might be on Netflix again at the moment. It's a very, very good film, parodying like the death of Stalin and the kind of all the vying for power after, and like collective action. It's a comedy. It's very satirical and very, very funny. So I do recommend a watch. And listening wise, I've gone for a piece of Beethoven, the Coriolan Overture, which is quite fascinating, I must say.
It's very interesting. The Death of Stalin. I must have a watch of that.
Well, we don't have we don't have a guest on this week, but what we do have is me. So I'm gonna, Oliver's, joyfully recommend that I speak to you for a minute without hesitation, deviation, or repetition about Côte d'Ivoire. So I've done quite a lot of research on Côte d'Ivoire at my Ep8 dissertation on Côte d'Ivoire. So I'll mainly focus on kind of its divides. It's had many divides in its own society. It's a country relatively small in West Africa, northwest Africa. It had a big boom in the cocoa industry originally, and it's faced many civil wars recently. But most of these civil wars, most of the crises which have happened there from post-1990 can be actually linked to the link back to the kind of political military crisis. There can be linked back kind of to their first president, Felix Houphouët-Boigny, who ruled for 33 years, and he did actually have, whether this is actually with voter fraud or not, he had a very, very high voting rate, like 99%, which is slightly questionable, I'd say. But lots of the kind of new political crises all formed from the division after he left office, and obviously he had a cocoa fund, which then he used to, instead of supposed to be there to pay cocoa workers when the cocoa price drops in the international market, but instead it was used to build a copy of St. Peter's Basilica, but build a copy of that in the jungle, which is a beautiful building, I must say. But again, most of his kind of allies there, most of his comrades, not that he wasn't a communist, but I should say most of his allies within governments and his opponents all then were vying for power. And you still see, I think it's Gab, I can't pronounce the last name, of Lawrence something, who's the current is it Ober, I can't pronounce their surnames. I can only pronounce Felix Houphouët-Boigny because I researched and learnt that. But most of the current leaders of Côte d'Ivoire all stem from kind of his time. So there's no new political figures really emerging. Mm-hmm. They're all quite old dinosaurs. Right. Yeah.
Just a minute.
Just a minute.
No,
just a minute. Indeed.
Perhaps next week I'll talk about something for a minute.
Indeed, yes.
I'll have to have a good think of what I can
talk for a minute.
And maybe just a minute.
Well, I must say that has wrapped up this week of PolitiBabble.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll have an interesting topic for you all next week.
Yes. Well, you never know. We haven't quite decided what we'll do yet, as we're doing some interesting interviews outside of this.
Yes, but if you do have any suggestions, please do let us know.
Yes.
And if you'd like to be a guest, please let us know.
So, yes. Join us next time for a discussion about, we'll decide then. Leave a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more, or share it to your fellow friends who might be interested in politics. You can find the podcast version of this on Max Radio's website, as well as your favourite podcast providers.
You've been PolitiBabbled.